It's the part of you that keeps you from having an emotional outburst. The part of you from stuffing that 5th cookie in your mouth. Part of you that keeps you from doing things that you know you shouldn't be doing.
The conscious mind can try to think of like what's the optimal strategy, but in a way that's going to ultimately exhaust you and ultimately make you less able to live life to your fullest, to be productive to your fullest. So in our last podcast on masculine versus feminine energy, I was kind of talking about my previous struggles with over-relying on the masculine spectrum, which we defined as conscious dominance, which is kind of using up the prefrontal cortex and its limited resources in terms of being too focused on willpower, which is a limited resource, too focused on structure and predictability and productivity in a way that was kind of stifling my own creativity and ability.
And very draining.
Yeah, and ability to be free and to feel, to get into flow and to, just...
It's also harder to be creative.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's when I had the idea of forcing myself to do a self-care activity every day, and
I think we had the idea.
Yeah, and Isla, and specifically to have Isla help me with that, because she is one that is very much, inclined to, we're opposite, personalities. So my struggles are your strengths and vice versa.
Yeah.
And so one such self-care activity was making puppets. So this was you gave this to me on Christmas. It was a surprise self-care box.
Our dad actually came up with the idea. It was a joint Christmas present.
Oh, yeah. And so this one is Bro, this one Isla made, and this one is Val. I made this one. And this is
Brad.
Yeah.
This is Queen Amidala.
Yeah. And so this was just a very fun activity that I thought I would share as just an example of what we're doing. I think we might want to take these off, but it was something that was really fun, and I think was really important for me to try to get out of the headspace that I was in a way that it's like, I think it's really difficult to solve problems that aren't obvious problems.
Yeah. I mean, like, looking at your day-to-day life, usually people's knee-jerk reaction is, oh, I wish I could do that. I wish my life was like that. Why can't I be that focused all the time?
Right. I was getting a lot of work done. I was being very productive. It was very structured. I was very organized. And all of these things that, for people like you, you might be thinking like, oh, wow, I wish I could do that.
Yeah.
Whereas, I was doing the same thing in terms of like, I felt like I wasn't reaching my full potential. I kind of felt stuck in that sort of mindset, and I saw you being so free and so creative. Yeah, and it was something in which I think that a lot of people might struggle with, because that is a lot of what our culture prioritizes is, being productive and being focused. If you're not working, you're wasting time. Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's something that we can too easily fall into, is that we might think that everything is going great. We might think that we are in the ideal place to be. And that's why I kind of did want to discuss what I was doing with self-care, but more specifically why. Because I do think that was something that I wish somebody could try to explain to me when I was kind of going through that, is that there is an alternative.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think, these kinds of things are stuff that I like always want to do. Right. And it makes sense. Like, it's really fun. Things like making sock puppets, listening to audiobooks. We tried pottery, all these different things that you would never really think to cut out time for and make a priority in your life. Like, what? Yeah. This is fun stuff. Maybe I'll do it if I get my work done. Right.
Well, that was something that in the Myers-Briggs personality test, there's one question of like, you always finish your chores before you relax. And that was definitely the mindset that I was in. But it was something in which I could tell there was something missing, and that's why I was like, I'm going to force myself to do one of these every day, and especially to have you there to be accountable. For
every day
being
I'd
able
be like,
to do that.
What's your self-care? You'd be like, I don't know. And I'd be like, here are 10 ideas for what we could do.
Yeah, so definitely those ideas, and just I think part of what's so important about it is that if you think about what I was doing, I was very much, you can see our Flow podcast to learn more about what this kind of is, but essentially if you're thinking about what I was really doing is I was overtaxing conscious resources, and this is what the prefrontal cortex, what its function does is it allows you to exercise willpower. It allows you to have critical thinking, logical decision making. It allows you it's where your short-term memory, and it allows you to essentially be very structured and kind of connect things in a logical train of thought.
It's the part of you that keeps you from having an emotional outburst.
Right.
The part of you from stuffing that 5th cookie in your mouth. The part of you that keeps you from doing things that you shouldn't be doing, that would be bad. But also the part of you that makes conscious and that makes conscious decisions that make logical and strategic decisions.
Yeah, but it's also the part of you that has a very limited energy store.
Yeah.
Because your conscious mind can process around 10 to 60 bits per second, whereas your subconscious mind can process, I think it's 10 to 20 million. And so that's a huge difference. And that's part of the reason why, it felt very limiting, is because I was limiting myself by not allowing myself to tap into the subconscious abilities, which is more of that intuition, instincts, creativity, and being able to be more in tune with your emotions to try to make decisions. And that's
and that is really important. And I think that not only was it, I think generally people can get into this balance of like work life, home life, where you're done with your work and then you go and then you have your self-care.
Right.
The problem is if you're running a business, if you're doing things that you inherently find very exciting and useful, and the goal of, it's easy to cut out time for you to take care of yourself and just relax if you're having that 9-to-5 job.
Right.
The problem with us is that we don't really have 9-to-5 jobs. And it's weird because we don't have the 9-to-5 school.
Right.
We don't have the 9-to-5 job.
Yeah.
And we're focusing, I think a lot of entrepreneurs will run into this problem where it's really easy to keep focusing and working. Because there are always more things to do. The chores never end.
Yeah, I think that the problem is also not just that, but also the fact that I was limiting my productivity by focusing so much on the focus aspect and the being productive aspect.
The objective measures.
Yeah, because what was happening is, I was just adding more and more things to pack into my day, but I was losing sight of the ability to kind of think about what is the path of least resistance, whereas the conscious mind can try to think of like what's the optimal strategy here, but in a way that's going to ultimately exhaust you and ultimately make you less able to live life to your fullest, to be productive to your fullest, to be able to think more clearly and freely about what you're doing, to try to make better decisions, to cut things out that aren't important, because the conscious mind is often uncomfortable with uncertainty, and so it tries to make things certain. And the way that I was doing that was by packing more and more things into my life so I could feel like, I was so productive today. I checked off all these things off my to-do list. Were those things really valuable? Sometimes no. And it was hard to think clearly about that. And so part of it was that is that I think what those who are kind of stuck in that mindset get into is not realizing that being able to have that self-care, what I was doing with self-care was I was forcing my conscious mind to try to redefine goals to say, like, whatever it is that was next on your to-do list is not the most important thing right now.
What's most important is making sock puppets with Isla.
Yeah. And it's about kind of being able to be more present so you can tap into those subconscious resources more, because the subconscious is not only good for making sock puppets. Yeah. It's also good for helping you come up with creative ideas to save time and make much better decisions. And that's ultimately what's really important in today's world, because your decisions are leveraged, right? If I make a better decision about what conversation to have on this podcast, that might make a huge difference in terms of now, the thousands of people that are going to see that, right? So those decisions are being leveraged digitally and to have way like huge impacts, whereas before that wasn't really the case. If you're producing something that's just, if your output is equivalent to the time you spend trying to produce
linear,
it.
Linear equation where the more time you put into it, you're going to get the same amount of output, then it's really easy, but that's not actually how it works.
Yeah, and in that environment, you do want to just use up your willpower and just go, right? That's how you succeed in that environment, but not in today's environment. In today's environment, your decisions are what matter the most. And if you are mentally hindering yourself by focusing too much on, am I being productive, or am I checking off everything on my to-do list? Am I, having the willpower to wake up every day at 5 a.m. and just, do everything perfectly? If you start to get into that mindset, you're not thinking clearly about the highest best thing for you to do. And I think that that's part of what's difficult about, trying to understand that with the conscious mind, is that what was really happening is I wasn't trusting myself. I wasn't trusting my own instincts and intuitions. I wasn't trusting that my emotions might be telling me something valuable about whether what I was doing was the best thing for me to do. Because your emotions are valuable data. It's not the only valuable data, but it is incredibly valuable data in the sense that if you are feeling emotional resistance to doing something, you are going to have to use more cognitive resources in order to do that.
And that means your subconscious and your conscious goals are not aligned.
Yes, exactly. And that is something that you should consider, because it means that the cost of doing that is going up in terms of your own energy. And that's really important, because that might change your calculation as to, is it worth it? Is it worth this amount of energy? And if it's something that's really effortless, that means that the cost of energy is lower, and that will change your ultimate, calculation as to whether it's worth for you to do. And that's something that I was not considering. And so I think that was something that was really important for me to understand in terms of being able to have that alignment and that flow between the conscious and subconscious.
Yeah. And I think you can feel like you just need to get into flow, and you can feel like you're fighting yourself for no reason. Yeah. And sometimes there are things that are incredibly boring that you just have to do, right?
Yeah.
But if you know that, you need to be aware of that, and that it's going to take more energy than just doing something you feel like you're already compelled to do. And you got to take care of yourself, because because you can't just run on that forever. Like with the subconscious, it can feel like you can keep going forever. Yeah. But with the conscious, you can't. Yeah. And so you can try and align your goals. But when you're using up those conscious resources, you also need to take a step back, and you gotta relax, Well,
that was something that kept happening to me, is that I would just go, and I would have very clear goals, and then I would just burn myself out. And then I would have to take a break, or oftentimes you guys would make me take a break, and then I would come back and I would do it all again. And that was something that was not sustainable, and it was not ultimately helpful in terms of actually getting me to where I wanted to go. And so I do think that there is a lot that goes into actually trying to optimize that process. And one part of it was forcing myself to take a step back back, because I think that that's part of what we can get into is you have such a clear goal and then you keep doing it, and then all you're doing is that goal, so that there's no space for you to reevaluate that goal. There's no space for you to reevaluate how to get there.
Not only take a step back, but take a step back every day.
Right.
Because, you can take a big step back and then go back right into it. And then, that's because that's not sustainable. That's not sustainable because you're not making it a regular thing. You're not stopping when you have 30% battery left. You're stopping when it's completely out and you just can't keep going.
Yeah, and I think that that's part of what these self-care activities was also helping me to prevent, was that it's not only about, getting fixated on a certain goal, but as you start to continue to try to get towards a specific goal, what happens is that there's a reinforcement mechanism of, as you continue to spend more time towards something that's super specific, everything else starts to become more and more irrelevant as you kind of essentially train yourself to have this very narrow lens of the world, and in a way that makes it harder and harder for you to try to have a broader understanding of what's going on and to see your life more holistically. And that's something that is really dangerous, because you can blind yourself to a lot of things by going down that path, by not understanding what is the goal, but not only what is the goal, but what's relevant to the goal, because you can become even more fixated and narrow as to what that is as well.
Yeah.
And that can feel very limiting, because it is. And I think that part of it is that we live in such a complicated world. We feel like we need to simplify it, and that's something that is definitely the case. We do need to have mental models and an understanding of what to do in any given moment, but at the same time, I think that the way in which to get there needs to incorporate both the conscious and subconscious, and I think that humanity as a whole is still learning how to do that, because it is something that is very unnatural. It used to be that we were completely aligned in our goals between our subconscious and conscious. It was about survival, and everybody can get on board with that. We need to kill that boar so we can eat. It's like, I'm up for it.
It's very obvious.
Yeah, it's really obvious, not complicated at all. So that I think that we need to recognize that it's not our fault that things are so complicated now, but it does mean we need to see the reality for what it is, so we can see what's the next step forward. How can we operate in this environment to be successful, but to also be happy?